A lot of people in the United States are like, oh, we don't care what the EU does. You need to. Because what they do and what they determine can affect stuff that we deal with over here. We have the left over here that's like, we love EU's open borders. Like, oh my gosh. And they want to implement that at the southern border and the northern border. And they've had, and we're, like I said, I'm going to set the table with it right now. We're going to deep dive into it a little bit more later on. But they have the EU elections. And if you just look at the headlines, because the European press is nuts. If you just look at the headlines, it's, oh my gosh, the Nazis are winning elections, the fascists, and they're all freaking out because people were tired of the open borders and the lack of sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And anything that isn't considered socialist is a Nazi fascist. That's how European leftists think. So if you're not a socialist, you are a Nazi fascist to them. I am not even remotely joking to you. I am not exaggerating either. That's literally how they think. If you are not a socialist, you are a Nazi fascist to them. It is, have you ever talked to a European leftist? They can barely speak. The moment they find out that you disagree with them and you're not a socialist, they can barely handle it. It's like the left here, except the left here have learned how to mask it a little bit. Over there, it's just crazy. And so they've been freaking out because of these elections in the European Union. And they've had this lack of support now. And you've seen the protests. Well, maybe you haven't, because if I'm being honest, our media here hasn't exactly liked showing you people protesting against open borders. They don't like the idea of people screaming about how Sharia law Islamic jurisprudence should be. That's the law of the land. They don't like support of just killing Jewish people. They don't like that. They don't like the idea of having a recategorized Europe that incorporates, I don't want to say barbaric because it's an insult to barbarians. I mean, genuinely. I mean, they turned out to, become the nice Germans and the French. I mean, come on. They don't want to support these backwards laws that enshrine violence against women and all of this other stuff that we've seen, like you've seen, in parts of the UK. And so they think that everybody who is not leftist like them is just basically like a Hitler. Which Hitler, Kane, what was Nazi short for? Remind everybody.
Socialist.
Say that last word again.
Socialist.
We're allowed.
Socialist.
Okay, thanks. Just saying. So these elections, you have the Greens, and then you have, everybody else. The left did not do well in these EU elections. In France, it was bad. Just to set the table. In France, it was bad. In Spain, it was bad for the left. I think that the conservative movement in Europe is gaining a lot of steam, and I think that they've performed incredibly well. For the left to freak out and act like, oh my gosh, the far right is taking over everything. They're not at the point of taking over everything yet. But this is some really good momentum. And the issue is that the left isn't going to adjust their strategy to adequately deal with it. You cannot keep enforcing lack of border control and all of these other issues relating to farming and the economy and all of this other stuff on people. They're done with it. They've had enough. If you're not going to adjust on that, you're going to continue to lose. And Spain even did. The left in Spain. Spain is a pretty socialist nation. I don't think that this is the far right taking over. I think it's the pendulum swinging back to a position of balance and normalcy. It is a correction. And the left has been so overrepresented and so reckless and so unrestrained that this is a voter correction. And these elections, this has been very interesting to watch because there have been huge advances. It's illegal immigration and inflation. And in France, Macron's dissolved the French parliament. They want snap elections coming up on June 30th and July 7th. He lost to Marine Le Pen's party. So, I mean, he lost her in the EU. He lost to her horribly, and she's part of the Identity and Democracy Coalition in the EU. So you have the EU, you have the European Union, it's the Parliament, and you have the conservative group, the ID Party within the EU. And full disclosure, when I went, because I wanted to understand this, nobody paid me to go there. Nobody did anything like that. And I'm very upfront with you guys. And this is one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of these things, because I don't like to give the appearance of any kind of impropriety or anything. And Kane and the staff, everybody knew. We went over there because I've been following it because I've been very interested. It seemed as though Europe was having a reaction, the right reaction to a lot of the overrepresentation with leftism, and they were becoming more effective than we were here in the US. And I was very curious as to how that was. Like they weren't just like flipping seats, they were keeping them. Where we go back and forth and we battle, and it's like, why is this such a, why are we struggling with these purple areas for so long? There's a couple of things in play. I wanted to understand why they were making some of the inroads that they were making with voters and what was fueling their dissatisfaction. And I also kind of wanted to see, and I was hoping, and I did, I wanted to kind of see how the right and the left interact at that level. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. The press hates them. But when we went over there, this was in March, went to Rome and talked with their deputy prime minister of Italy and some of the other members of the ID party. They had an event there on that Saturday, and we went. We were just, we were observers. My husband and I went. We were just kind of observing. And again, nobody paid us. Nobody did anything like that. It was a very eye-opening trip. And these people are just as much conservative as we are, and they get slammed for it by their press, because the press, just like here in the United States, is on the exact same page as and they're straight up socialists. They're not just leftists in these European nations. They are straight up socialist. They're commies. It's all, different sides of the same coin. They are very, very far left. And it was interesting to see how they were treated by members of their press, and then the press would write some salacious stuff about them, and then if they defended themselves, then they were charged with hate crimes, or that's what happened to Matteo Salvini, the deputy prime minister of Italy. He wouldn't allow a bunch of people who were trying to illegally immigrate into Italy off the boat, and they were like, oh, you're kidnapping. They wanted to charge him with all these crimes, put him away for 20 years. It's crazy. Their press is out of control, and they're protected by the veneer of the press, right? And it was very interesting to hear their struggles and how they were dealing with these issues. And one of the things I noted, and I think this is kind of the difference a little bit with how they're doing it there as opposed to how we're doing it here. They are very, 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 very grassroots on the ground over there. Whereas in American politics, it's very top down. You have a ton of different groups, right? You have all these, you can name a whole bunch of them. I know you can. You have all these different groups. You have all these different think tanks. You have all this different stuff. And there isn't as much engagement like on the ground in the seeds of the grassroots, if that makes sense. Whereas in Europe, these people are out literally like in the streets, in the neighborhoods, doing all of this stuff. Very, very hard work, electioneering. And I had been talking to a number of their leaders about that. And I found that very interesting. It was like old school electioneering. Retail politics at its most organic, which I think is something that we've got to do more of here. But a lot of people like to outsource it to different groups, to different strategists, to influencers, to consultants, and that doesn't necessarily translate to lasting victory. As cosmetic as your outreach is going to be, that's going to be equally cosmetic your victory. So we're going to talk more about what these results mean, but just to kind of put it up on the table for you, as in first course, it is very hopeful to see this, because these are people who are allies and potential greater allies. And you want to have more like-minded people in the world, not fewer like-minded people in the world.